Welcome to the Koi Farmer, where we focus on cultivating clarity in the complicated world of pharmacy benefits. I'm Justine. I'm a pharmacist with 20 years of experience in the business of pharmacy. And today in our Drug Pricing Index series, we're going to be breaking down ASP, or average sales price. Most of the indexes that we've been looking at so far have been on the pharmacy benefit side of the business. Now we're going to move into ASP, which is primarily used on the medical benefit side of the business. Today we're going to go over when it's used, how it works, how some of the reporting timing can impact health systems, some parallel concepts in the industry, and then finally we'll talk through some pros and cons of the index, some market changes, how site of care mix and shared HCPCS code can create shifts in the ASP index. So let's dive in.
You're looking for the cure, but you're stuck in the weeds, bringing you insights into
Medicare Part B as in boy is primarily designed for patients that are receiving care under the medical benefit. So typically this will include drugs that are dispensed in a hospital type of setting, could be home infusion, or other type of infused medications are very common. There are a couple of products on the pharmacy side that tend to fall under Medicare Part B as in boy, and these can include some testing supplies, vaccines, and a couple of other products that may be shipped from pharmacies to health systems to be able to administer to patients. So the most common path is folks are getting care at a health system or hospital, and that generates ASP pricing under Medicare Part B. Again, as we've talked about several of the other pricing indexes, Medicare Part D as in dog is typically reimbursed on an AWP-based pricing basis, and there are some considerations coming into play with the maximum fair price rules in Medicare Part D. So now we know that ASP is generally considered a medical benefit type reimbursement for Medicare. Next, we're going to dive a little bit deeper into how ASP works, the reporting timing, and some parallel concepts in the industry. Similar to the way that NADAC works on the pharmacy benefit, ASP is meant to capture actual acquisition costs on the medical benefit. So ASP is trying to capture an average cost for hospitals, physician and clinic administered products, home infusion, and specialty pharmacies where those products are white bag or brown bag to one of these facilities. It's meant to capture what the drug manufacturer is selling their products to these entities at, and that information gets reported to CMS on a regular basis. As we look at the timing of how ASP gets reported, there are some important delays because, again, this is based on actual payments. So in Q1, the manufacturer is looking at what they sold products to health systems, to physicians at between January and March. They then assemble a report that they provide to CMS for that particular quarter, and CMS does their tabulation the following quarter to make sure that they are normalizing for any outliers and reviewing what the ASP should be set at. Then finally, in July, the rates that get published are typically tied to the rates that were actually being reimbursed to manufacturers during Q1. So there's about a 6-month lag between actual reimbursements and when the ASP gets updated. In 2026, in Medicare reimbursement, most products are reimbursed at a standard fee schedule of ASP plus 6%. So in this example, if the ASP for a particular product is $4,000 for that amount of drug, you would multiply that times 1.06, and that would lead you to a reimbursement rate of $4,240 if you are one of the entities that is billing under the ASP Medicare reimbursement rates. In a prior episode, we talked some about the NADAC or NADAC index and how this tracks through the manufacturers selling products to wholesalers or to pharmacies. In the case of NADAC, the NADAC price only captures the invoice price for a particular drug. It does not necessarily capture off-invoice discount. For example, if the manufacturer were to provide an extra discount on a product if a wholesaler gets to a certain generic utilization rate, that would not be captured in the NADAC index. You can see our episode on NADAC for a little bit more information on how this works. Within the ASP index, it's a more comprehensive capture of what's actually taking place in the purchase. So in the cases where there are off-invoice discounts being given to the health systems that are dispensing these products, those off-invoice discounts are considered in the calculation of ASP. So we've got down some of the basics of how ASP works, when it's used, and how the reporting timing works. Some of these elements are really critical in understanding how the fine print flows through ASP. So we're going to talk a little bit about pros and cons, about how market changes might impact reimbursements to hospitals and health systems, how site of care mix and shared HCPCS codes can sometimes create some strange and mysterious movements in the ASP index. So what makes ASP tricky? There's, again, a 6-month lag in the changes. There can be influence in the index as drugs may move across different sites of care. And then also shared HCPCS can skew the index. And we'll go through a couple of examples of these last two as we move on here. So first, we're going to talk about timing of changes. So in this example, there's a product where maybe the WAC moved up 10% in the middle of the year. In this case, the hospital may be contracted with the manufacturer to purchase that product on a basis of WAC. So typically they may be purchasing that product at WAC -3. But now WAC is 10% higher than it was before. Again, for a more comprehensive understanding of WAC, you can look at our video on wholesale acquisition costs. We'll put the link in the show notes. Because there's a 6-month lag in ASP change, what then can happen is, again, the hospital is reimbursed at ASP plus 6%. In this case, the hospital can actually realize a loss to fill this particular product because the ASP that they're being reimbursed on is not reflective of the 10% hike that just went into place that caused them to have to purchase the product for more money. Next, we're going to go through a little example of how site of care mix can impact the ASP for a particular product. So in this example, we have the variety of sites of care that are included in the ASP calculations. So we've got a non-340B hospital, we maybe have a covered entity or a 340B hospital included as well, physician and clinic billing, home infusion, and possibly white or brown bagging from a specialty pharmacy. So in this case, there are a variety of different units being dispensed at a certain price for those units. And the ASP in this example is set at $4,746, and ASP plus 6% will come to $5,031 for Medicare Part B reimbursement. And that reimbursement is in effect for these entities. No matter which one of these entities is the dispensing entity, this reimbursement will prevail. So in an updated example where there may be a shift in site of care towards cover entity or 340B health systems, this could potentially move the ASP across that entire product to be lower than it previously was. So instead of $5,031 reimbursement, because the site of care has shifted for this product in this particular quarter, the Medicare Part B reimbursement would only be $4,948 for this product at this time. This can create some challenges for these systems as they're trying to track how much they'll be reimbursed for these particular products, because this is changing potentially every quarter. The concept of HCPCS coding should probably merit its own episode. But for now, just know that it stands for Healthcare Common Procedure Coding System. And this is a code that is submitted on the medical claim that shows which particular drug is dispensed. On the pharmacy claims, most of those drugs are dispensed on an NDC basis. And NDC billing is very specific to an individual product. On the medical benefit, HCPCS codes are not necessarily as specific. So there can be examples, such as in drug A, where a product with different strengths may have the same HCPCS code. In the second example, drug B, an originator and a biosimilar may share a HCPCS code. This was very common in the dawn of biosimilars and has become a little bit less common over time. And then finally, some of the formulations can even share HCPCS codes. So for example, if there were an IV formulation and a sub-Q formulation of a product, those could share codes. Just as easily as these products can share codes, there are sometimes instances where they don't. So this is where it becomes tricky because the HCPCS codes work on a level of strange and mysterious ways. So in certain cases, drugs of different strengths of the same product may have different HCPCS. Similarly, the originator and biosimilar could have different HCPCS. And again, formulations may share HCPCS and may not share HCPCS. So when calculating, the ASP gets calculated at a HCPCS code level. So that means that if these products, NDC1, NDC2, NDC3, were all sharing a HCPCS code, which could be very possible in the way that the market is designed, these products would get a shared ASP reimbursement. So no matter which one of these products is dispensed, the reimbursement would be $4,672 for each of these products across the board. This dynamic can create some really interesting incentives for physicians as they're looking at which products to prescribe and dispense, which is probably, again, worth its entire own episode. Similar to how we looked at the site of care shift, there can be changes in the utilization of these products that share a HCPCS code. So for example, if the utilization moved from the originator to biosimilar B, and now the weighting of the various products within this HCPCS code are different, that can then lead to a different reimbursement rate across the board. So in this example, the Medicare reimbursement is now $3,102, which you can see is potentially a great profit if the physician or health system is dispensing biosimilar B, but may actually result in a loss for the health system if they're dispensing the originator product. Again, interestingly, there can be reverse incentives in this space where sometimes the biosimilar is actually the disadvantaged product, probably, again, worth its entire own episode. Thanks for sticking with us today to break down ASP, our first medically focused index in the Drug Pricing Index series. As always, we appreciate any likes or subscribes to our content. If you have any feedback, please provide that on our website, www.thekoifarmer.com. And if you work in an organization where you think, hey, there's probably a lot of folks around here that can understand the industry, understand some of these basic components a little bit better, let us know.
Looking for the cure.